Hey, I got a new camera and I have no clue how to use this thing. Help
All right,
me.
so how much of this stuff on the screen do you understand?
What screen?
We're gonna learn what all this stuff means. Any camera you use, the fundamentals are the same. So once you learn this camera, you can go pick up any like point and shoot camera and figure out how that's working. You could also pick up a big movie camera and generally understand what it's doing. Okay, so a classic camera has three main components. It has a lens, right? And then it has a shutter, which is that right there.
Okay.
And then it has a sensor underneath it. Pops open for a second. So those are the three main components. Let's start with the lens. What does a lens do? I'm gonna blast this light on you. We have this lens, and whatever I'm pointing this lens at, it's actually collecting light from you and projecting it back here. So you can actually see it.
Oh, I see what you're
see it?
doing. Wow, that's pretty cool.
They figured out they can take an image and then they could project it. In the very first versions, they would take it and they would actually like trace it. So don't move. I'm gonna take an old school picture of you. Hey, stop moving. This only works if you don't move. That's you.
That is not
Would you
me.
like to hang that?
No.
Chemistry and science happened, and then they developed film. Material that's super sensitive to light. There would be the film in the back. There's the lens that projects that image into the film. The film is always kept in a dark area, and then just when the shutter opens, it just burns that image right into there. Now it's a digital camera, so it's just a sensor. It's not film, so it's a lot more convenient. Imagine taking a mental picture like that. Do I look really cool doing this?
Yeah.
Mental picture. Your eyes are like the lens because it actually chooses what to look at. And then I have the eyelids that are kind of just like controls when I look at something, right? And then my brain takes the information from my eyes and then processes it and makes it into a picture in my...
Pop quiz. What are the three main parts of the camera? If you don't know this part, congratulations, you're a failure. Go back and rewatch this segment, you slacker.
Lens, the shutter, and the crap.
Failure.
Sensor.
Sensor.
Yeah, this is a digital camera, so it's sensor, but back in the day it was a film strip. That's my son. This is like nighttime.
This is very unique.
What do you guys
That's
thought?
a
Look how
very unique
beautiful that is.
sun.
That's the sun. It also looks like a bed bug, but or it looks like a amoeba. Based on how bright the environment is, you have to set the camera to that right amount. Have you ever been inside a dark place for a long time and then you go outside for the first time and then your eyes hurt because you're blinded?
Of course.
That's because your eyes are adjusted to nighttime. And then it takes a second for your eyes to adjust to suns. Great lens.
It's like a lens.
That is such a good lens.
First time.
Give me that. Step one is to get proper exposure. The technical term is overexposed or underexposed. I'm just gonna start using the word brighter and darker so that it's easier. If you're out in broad daylight, you basically want everything to be up here. If it gets cloudy, you have to adjust this all here. Auto does a pretty good job and generally place you in the ballpark. Now, manual is important because then you can really fine tune everything. We're gonna be using the word stops a lot.
A stop is a measurement of light. Sort of like when you go to your local pizza joint and say, hey Antonio, give me 3 slices of pizza. You know how much pizza you're gonna get. In the same way, you can also say, hey Antonio, give me 3 stops of light.
This is generally a properly exposed photo, right? This is 2 stops brighter. This is 4 stops brighter.
Sorry.
And this is 2 stops darker. This is 4 stops darker, which is basically
Can't even
just
see
like
me.
you look like a ninja. Let's say you bring this down 2 stops. Your image is gonna come out 2 stops too dark. Then you can bring this up 2 stops to balance it out, or you can bring this up 2 stops, or you could bring them both up 1 stop. Now, why do we want to do that? Anytime you adjust any of these 3 things, it affects how the picture comes out. Film is ISO, shutter is shutter speed, f-stop is your lens.
So is ISO short for something?
I don't know, why are you asking me these
No, I'm just
complicated
curious
questions?
because I want to know what it means.
Now no one's gonna listen to me. I will summon the film god.
International Standardized Organization?
International standardized
No
organization.
standards. Organic.
Shut up! I don't care. It's how sensitive the film is. Back in the day, it was different types of film.
Okay.
And if you were gonna go and photograph something at night, you would need a piece of film that was very sensitive because you don't have that much light to work with. The higher the number the ISO is, the more sensitive it is.
Okay.
So it picks up more light.
Yes.
Every time you double the ISO, it's 1 stop higher.
Okay.
But here's the catch. The higher you put your ISO, the grainier the picture's gonna get. I usually shoot in between 100 ISO and 3200 ISO, but cameras are getting better now where you can shoot at even higher ISOs and it still comes out clean. Okay, shutter speed. For an example, you have a shutter speed at 1 second.
Okay.
What that means is that you're gonna open up that shutter for 1 full second. The longer you leave the shutter open, the more light you're letting in.
Right.
The faster you make that shutter, the darker it's gonna get.
Yeah.
Every time you double the amount of time, or you divide the time in half, it's a stop. So we'll go to half a second is a stop, a quarter of a second is a stop, and it keeps going down. If you leave the shutters open for a second, that's a pretty long time. The amount of motion I do in that second is all gonna come out as motion blur. So it almost looks like I'm a ghost, like moving through space. Sometimes you can leave the shutter open for a very long time. Let's say we're doing night photography. They do that by putting the camera on a tripod and they leave it super duper still and they leave the shutter for like 30 seconds. So the shutter's open for 30 seconds, absorbing light over a long period of time, and then you'll generate a picture out of it. Usually you want the shutter to be much faster. So you go to half a second and there's a little bit less blur, and then a quarter of a second, a little bit less blur. Generally speaking, I start around 1/60th of a second. So
Okay.
just a fraction of a second. It's fast enough to capture them without there being motion blur. If you're filming action,
Okay.
like sports, you want it to be like 1/500th of a second. Hey, this is insane. You're an insane person. What are you doing? This is insane. Depth of field is the amount that's in focus. Looking at this, oh yeah, this is a shallow depth of field. You're in focus, everything in the background is generally blurred out, right?
Right.
But this is a deep depth of field. So
Okay,
if you
okay,
look,
yeah.
there's
Serious,
you, everything
okay.
in the background is also in focus. The easiest way to remember it is lower the number, shallower the depth of field is. Now the amount of brightness, lower the number, the f-stop is, so let's say you're at a 1.4, that brings in a lot of light. But then if you go the other way, it's gonna get darker, white balance. Now, if you go outside, the sun is a completely different color than a fire. A fire is very orange, and then if you go into a cloudy day, it's very blue. We don't really notice that because our brains automatically adjust to the type of lighting we're in, but in cameras, it comes out very apparent. If you're outdoors, you would set it to daylight, obviously. If it's cloudy, set it to cloudy. Once you get a little bit more comfortable with everything, you can start sliding that around a little bit, and you can purposely add more warmth or coolness to a picture.
Okay.
So here's a little cheat sheet and a recap. Your f-stop decides your depth of field, your shutter speed decides your motion blur, and your ISO decides how much noise and grain come out in your picture. And also don't forget that every time you make an adjustment to any of these, it's gonna adjust how bright or dark your picture is gonna come out.
Surprise! It's me again. Pause this video and see how many of these you can answer. If you got them wrong, you disappoint me just like your parents have said so many times. Rewatch the part you don't understand.
See that right there? That's kind of like your light meter, and that generally tells you how exposed you are. This will generally get you in the ballpark, and then you kind of tune from there.
Okay.
When you're looking at the lens, the most important thing to look at is the focal length, which is like the amount of zoom
Okay.
it is. Lower the number, the
wider.
wider. The higher the number, the more zoomed in it is. A pretty standard set would be a wide lens, which is 16 to 35. So 16 to 35, wide.
Okay.
24 to 70 is like mid-range, and then 70 to 200 is a pretty common telephoto lens. Telephoto means like tight zoom lens. Before we get too much into that, there's one thing I should explain is that
Okay.
this 50 millimeters is gonna look different on that camera than this camera. The reason is this is a full frame camera. A lot of cameras like this would have a sensor called an APS-C, which is very common sensor size for like prosumer cameras. Since it has a smaller sensor, the picture comes out looking a lot more zoomed in. So basically, if I were to put a 50 millimeter on a full frame camera like this is true 50 millimeter. But if you were to put this on a camera like this has a crop factor of 1.6, so then you would multiply the 50 by 1.6. So then it would become an 80 millimeter lens. Now let's go back to these lenses. So you have 18 to 55. Since it's on a camera that's a 1.6 crop factor, it's like a mid-range lens.
Okay.
This is your telephoto lens in case you want to spy on your neighbors.
Yes.
Now this one is a 50 millimeter lens, and these are called prime lenses. The prime just means it can't zoom. But the advantage of that is that your f-stop can go all the way to 1.8. It's pretty common for people to want to bring their f-stop lower. You could take pictures in darker places, and also you get that shallow depth of field. And shallow depth of field is very popular. That's what most people want. This
Why is
one's
that?
is 3.5. What's
Why
that?
does people like a lot of the depth of field?
It draws your eye to this. Like here, people are just gonna look at just you and not the background. That's what you want. Just me. Here you can see there's your focal range.
Right.
You see that 3.5 to 5.6. Let's say you're zoomed out all the way.
Right.
Then your lowest f-stop is gonna be a 3.5. And then if you're zoomed in all the way, it can't go all the way to 3.5 anymore. It can only go to 5.6. So that's the lowest you can bring your f-stop to. This is a zoom lens. This one's 24 to 70, but see how much bigger and heavier it is? And this is it's much more expensive because it's a zoom lens, but it goes to 2.8. And see how like these lenses have a range? This one's 3.5 to 5.6. This one is locked off at 2.8. That means even when you zoom, it's always at 2.8. Now you just have to go out and practice.
Yes.
But just keep shooting and then you'll eventually be super familiar with it. And then you'll just start dialing in all these settings without even thinking about it.
One last thing, if you have a couple of different lenses and you go to switch them out, try to do it as fast as possible and also avoid doing it in dusty environments. If dust or particles get onto the sensor, they do sometimes come out in the pictures and then you will require cleaning.
Well, that's pretty much all you need to know to get started. Not too overwhelming, I hope. I'm thinking of making a part 2 about how to use this knowledge to apply it towards video. All of the stuff we just talked about does translate over to video, but there are a few things that you do need to know, like frame rate, codec, 180-degree rule, resolution, etc. So let me know if that's something you want to see in the future. And I know there's a ton of information in here, so if you're new to the world of cameras, best thing to do is to go out and shoot. Don't worry, this will all become second nature very quickly now that you understand the concept of everything. Have fun shooting.